Have you ever sensed an embrace from a friend turn distant? Noticed how their laughter rings out but doesn't touch their eyes? You rationalize it, insisting it's nothing, that affection naturally fades and returns. Deep down, however, an unease settles. Your intuition, sensing a reality your thoughts are not ready to face. A specific kind of sorrow comes from realizing that someone who walked with you was never truly with you. This isn't the clean cut of a known adversary. It's the gradual hemorrhage of confidence, seeping away until you suddenly find you've been on your own all along. You recall a moment of vulnerability, a secret shared with a faltering voice. Then days pass, and you hear it echoed, no longer yours, but on another's lips, distorted, cheapened, and laid bare. The deception isn't announced with dramatic flair. It arrives with a grin, a relaxed voice, an intimacy that feels artificial. The truly destructive aspect of the false friend isn't their existence, but their act. They master the cadence of your joy, mimic your frustrations, and provide comfort with a gaze that remains unmoved. Externally, they appear to be the pinnacle of devotion, the ally who constantly follows your steps. Yet shadows persist not from affection, but due to a light they cannot generate. This is what psychologists term impression management, the skill of presenting a curated self that others desire or respect, all while concealing the authentic person inside. In some cases, it's a defensive tactic rooted in fear, a facade crafted in a childhood where love was conditional and affection required effort. For others, however, it evolves into something more sinister. It ceases to be a shield and becomes a tool of aggression, a facade used not for self-preservation, but for influence. You start to see the recurring behavior, the companion who draws nearest when you fail, only to disappear when you succeed, the person fluent in the vocabulary of solace, but ignorant of the work of allegiance. The one who applauds, yet whose praise rings with the emptiness of jealousy. You're left to question the duration of this rehearsal. How many smiles were just memorized dialogue in a drama you were unaware you were part of? The reality is unsettling. The false friend isn't the obvious antagonist, attacking with clear malice. They are the silent shade, pacing alongside you, mirroring your movements, anticipating the instant your vulnerability turns into their opportunity. Still, the deepest sting isn't their deceit. It's acknowledging you let yourself trust, confusing the act for authenticity, the facade for the individual. What if this behavior doesn't start in maturity? What if the origins of the false friend are sown much sooner, in youth, when facades are first adopted and shadows emerge? That is the next place to examine. Have you observed that many persuasive deceivers started as children desperate for affection? Imagine a young boy at dinner, his gaze shifting between his parents, attempting to gauge their emotional state before risking a word. He rapidly discovers that his honesty is perilous, that truth can provoke rage, so he starts to modify his persona. His laugh grows more exuberant when his father is pleased. His quietness deepens when his mother is weary. Each adjustment teaches him the subtle craft of the facade, not from ill will, but from need. Our early years have a method of showing us what gains acceptance and what prompts dismissal. For some, love is absolute, gentle, merciful, and constant. For others, however, affection seems like a payment to be acquired via performance, compliance, or pretense. When a child discovers that authenticity leads to penalty, while pretense yields benefit, the roots of duplicity are set. You don't deceive by choice. You deceive because it seems the only means of survival. Attachment theory explains that a caregiver's reaction to a child's needs forms the template for that child's future relationships. The avoidant child, frequently overlooked, learns to pull inward, concealing their pain with self-reliance. The anxious child, receiving sporadic parental love, learns to contort themselves to maintain that affection. Both learn that being completely genuine is hazardous. They rehearse the act until it is instinctual, until the facade feels more secure than the person underneath. Consider a young girl who observes that her siblings' setbacks earn her accolades. She learns to emphasize her own achievements, not from happiness, but to keep affection bound to her. Or another child who finds that tears are greeted with annoyance, so she quickly stifles them, conceals her hurt, and learns to smile while fracturing inside. These minor lessons accumulate like stones, constructing a fortress of inauthenticity. Even as the child matures, the barriers persist. A disquieting contradiction exists here. The false friend of maturity might have been the child who simply craved a bond. The very facade that now hides deceit once protected a vulnerable core. Yet the mask, once constructed, isn't easily shed. It becomes a survival tactic so deeply embedded that genuineness starts to feel alien, even perilous. Thus, the child who mastered survival through pretense grows into the adult who dons the facade effortlessly, the grin that hides jealousy, the empathy that cloaks bitterness, the company that holds an agenda. It all stems from those initial vulnerable years when love was conditional, earned via a performance. But what occurs when this child matures and enters the realm of friendship, where the facade is no longer just defense but a tool for control? That is when the narrative darkens. Resembling a facade of warmth, yet vacant behind the eyes, the false friend navigates your life with actions that seem recognizable but never completely real. You detect it in their softened tone when you falter, a comfort that seems sincere initially but sours with unspoken contentment. Then, upon your recovery, when you attain a long-sought goal, their quiet deepens, their smile tightens, and their praise is barbed. It's a curious inconsistency, no? The individual who pulls close when you are vulnerable is frequently the one who withdraws when you are strong. The false friend flourishes in your fragility, as your vulnerability reinforces their security, but your strength reveals their own inadequacy. Your achievement becomes a mirror showing them what they are missing, causing their loyalty to warp, snap, and reform as silent resentment. Daily existence conceals many masks like this. The friend who discusses you negatively disguised as care, stating, "I'm just concerned," while privately relishing the conflict. The friend who appears when it is advantageous, wearing loyalty like a mantle when it elevates them, yet dropping it when it becomes too costly. Their backing is conditional, their presence a transaction, yet their performance is so polished that you question your own perceptions, persuading yourself the void in their gaze is just your imagination. This conflict between the reality you perceive and the story you are given is what psychologists label dissonance. Humans are predisposed to trust, to accept the smiles of their inner circle, as inclusion is not merely psychological, but physiological. Neuroscience confirms that the brain's reward pathways activate when we experience social acceptance. You therefore hold on to the mask, not from blindness, but because your system desires the illusion of security more than it dreads the betrayal. But this is the profound tragedy. The false friend is not invariably acting with conscious malice. At times, they are just repeating a role learned long ago. They maintain the facade not as a plot against you, but from an inability to remove it. Their jealousy isn't always a choice. It is the lingering shadow of their own unaddressed pain. Regardless, the impact on you is identical. Their mask fosters your confusion. Their resentment fosters your silence, and their shadow starts to dim your own light until you doubt if friendship itself is ever genuine. These facades are not, however, mere coincidences. They are anchored in profound psychological patterns, in the basic wiring of the human psyche, where deceit and survival are interwoven. To grasp them entirely, one must enter the scientific domain, where the brain and behavior reveal the hidden operations of betrayal. Why does betrayal sometimes feel so meticulously planned, as though the false friend were acting from a script drafted long before you met? Psychology provides a chilling explanation. Deception isn't merely a character defect. It's a capability of the mind itself. Research on impression management indicates that almost everyone learns to shape an image, influencing others' perceptions. You do it as well, muting your candor in an interview, moderating your speech in a tense situation. But while most use these facades as minor survival tools, some employ them as armaments. This is where social identity theory applies. The drive to belong, to seem worthy to the group, compels some individuals to take on roles that benefit them, even at others' expense. For the false friend, loyalty isn't a principle, it's a show. Neuroscience reinforces this troubling fact. Brain scans reveal that when an individual successfully deceives another for personal benefit, the brain's reward pathways, particularly the striatum, activate similarly to receiving money or food. Deception can feel stimulating, almost habit-forming. This suggests some people don't just lie, their biology rewards them for it. This makes manipulation more than a moral failing. It becomes a neurological feedback loop, a cycle where deceit feels positive enough to be repeated. This is where the psychology of the dark triad enters: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. We usually attribute these traits to notorious figures or major criminals, but studies indicate they exist in milder, more elusive forms in average people. The narcissistic friend who seems to listen, but only to steer the topic back to themselves. The Machiavellian friend who acts supportive while subtly maneuvering to keep you subordinate. Psychopathic tendencies might not manifest as violence, but as a startling lack of empathy when you are most vulnerable. In everyday life, these traits are not obvious. They are communicated in faint smiles, minor acts of sabotage, and the lack of genuine compassion. Consider the friend who encourages your bad habits because your failure makes them feel superior, or the one who accidentally shares your secret because the resulting chaos puts them at the center of attention. These are not character flaws. They are reflections of deeper psychological processes refined by life and reinforced by the brain. Despite this science, what is most disturbing is not the cold process of deception, but the humanity within it. These are not monsters in masks, but people. People who learned that manipulation provided safety, that betrayal offered a sense of belonging. The science tells us how, but it doesn't excuse the shadow it creates. Beneath the scans and theories lies something even darker, the unsettling shadow side of human connection, where envy consumes love and friendship becomes a covert battlefield. It is there, in that shadow, that the false friend's true nature is exposed. A shadow cannot exist without a light source to cast it. In the same manner, the false friend draws validation not from your sorrow, but from the radiance of your vitality. It isn't your vulnerability that bothers them, it's your strength. They draw near when you falter, but their hold intensifies when you recover, as if your rise threatens to reveal the emptiness they've tried to conceal within. Picture a woman who just got the news she awaited, a promotion secured through years of quiet effort. She confides in the person she trusts most. That friend's mouth forms a smile, but the eyes betray a darker emotion. The congratulations are offered, but the warmth is tinged with jealousy. Within days, quiet criticisms spread through their circle, planted by the very one who had stood by her. It isn't her failure that sustains them. It's the glare of her success that provokes their appetite. Jealousy is the shadow's hidden source. It grows silently, like moss on a foundation, unseen until the structure itself starts to weaken. False friends don't just resent your successes, they require them. Without that comparison, their own identity dissolves. To genuinely celebrate, you would mean facing their own shortcomings, so they instead convert the celebration into sabotage. The harder they laugh at your defeat, the more secure they feel in their own unstable world. Carl Jung identified the shadow self, the aspects of our being we suppress, reject, or dread. The false friend projects that shadow onto you. Your happiness becomes a spotlight on their own lack. Your bravery highlights their own cowardice. Your light is the mirror reflecting what they refuse to see. Instead of confronting their internal demons, they try to shatter the external reflection. This is the false friend's paradox. They treat your accomplishments like weights around their own necks, pulling them further into resentment as you shine brighter. They may never say it, but their comfort is found not in your power, but in your powerlessness. They are most at ease when you are defeated, as only then does their own shadow appear less menacing. This darkness, however, isn't fueled by envy alone. Envy might start the fire, but it's our culture, society, and shared narratives that build the stage for these shadows to act. If the false friend is the performer, then the world itself has supplied the script that lets them succeed. Have you observed how the world seldom asks about your authenticity, but rather your skill at appearances? From youth, you're instructed to smile when you'd rather not, to express gratitude when you feel none, to acquiesce even when you fundamentally disagree. Gradually, you learn that society doesn't value truth as highly as it values the performance. The mask, once a survival tool, thus becomes the price of admission. Modern culture has elevated this illusion. You witness it in how success is gauged not by integrity, but by prominence, not by character, but by image. The business events where contacts matter more than character. The office cultures where compliance earns more recognition than originality. In this subtle training, you realize why false friends aren't rare. They are the output of a system that favors facades over substance. Social media is the most obvious example. As you scroll, you enter a performance space where every smile is managed, every friendship is posed, every vow of loyalty is designed for consumption. False friends excel in this environment because they know the rules. Connection isn't about being present. It's about seeming present. A like stands in for empathy. A comment stands in for concern. In this unstable marketplace of attention, the pretender often outpaces the genuine because their effort is directed at image, not integrity. Psychologists refer to this as the good person myth, the belief that society esteems you most when you are pleasant, non-confrontational, and conform to expectations. This myth, however, has a price. For every good friend who smiles through their resentment, there's a corresponding decay of trust. For every compliant nod, there's an essential truth forced deeper into the shadows. What starts as social cohesion becomes a fertile ground for quiet duplicity. The philosopher Plato illustrated this in his allegory of the cave. People bound in darkness mistake shadows for reality, applauding illusions while disregarding the truth. Similarly, you might find yourself accepting the shadow of loyalty as loyalty itself, confusing the performance of friendship with its actual substance. The longer you stay in that cave, the more difficult it is to distinguish between them. But illusions, regardless of their persuasiveness, cannot hold. Masks break, performances slip, and the resulting damage isn't just shattered trust, but shattered hearts. What fails is not just a false friendship, but the hope that love in this world could exist without the pretense. You are then left with the question that follows every betrayal. What is the price of existing in a culture that champions pretenders? The answer is found not in the superficial smiles, but in the emotional toll that emerges when the show is finally over. Have you ever been laughing in a full room, yet felt an emptiness in your chest? A sense that nobody really saw you? That the sound was not connection, but concealment? This is the silent toll of trusting a friend who was never truly present. The facade they wore doesn't just mislead you, it alters how you view every subsequent relationship. Imagine a man in his 30s at a gathering surrounded by known faces. The conversation flows, old stories, shared experiences, voices filling the air. Internally, though, he feels the burden of time lost on connections that were merely convenient. He recalls how his vulnerability was often met not with safety, but with manipulation. Now, even among people who call him a friend, he feels the chill of isolation, as if watching the world from behind a barrier. Psychologists refer to this as the corrosion of trust. When a betrayal wounds you, the mind starts to falter, to doubt the very instincts that once led you to connect. Neuroscience reveals that the brain areas linked to social pain, like the anterior cingulate cortex, activate just as they do with physical injury. The false friend leaves damage not on the skin, but on the nervous system, conditioning you to see connection as a threat and intimacy as a gamble you might not survive. You consequently start to pull back, incrementally. You doubt if a hand on your shoulder is comfort or a strategic hold. You question if a smile is a celebration or veiled jealousy. The heart that once opened freely begins to bolt its doors, each betrayal adding another lock. You might still laugh, still socialize, still connect, but the laughter is weaker. The gatherings feel hollower, the connections less profound. The loneliness behind the laughter isn't a lack of company, it's the lack of being truly seen. You can be in a room of companions and feel invisible because the betrayal convinced you that your authentic self must stay concealed. Depression thrives in this gap between you and others, where suspicion taints the ground and nothing genuine can grow. Yet, even here, a question remains. Must every wound mean a life devoid of closeness? Betrayal might teach doubt, but it can also provide clarity. A path forward exists, one that demands not the end of trust, but its refinement. To walk it, you must learn to see, more accurately, how to protect without hardening, and how to recover without becoming empty. Have you considered why the damage from betrayal lasts so long? It's because it doesn't just sever trust in others, it cuts into your trust in yourself. When a friend's facade breaks, revealing envy beneath the affection, you start to wonder if you were naive, if your judgment was flawed, or if you somehow invited the deception. Recovery, however, doesn't mean shutting your eyes. It means opening them wider. The reality is that people show their true selves when they believe no one is paying attention. The eyes that spark when you fail, the quiet that falls when you succeed, the words that sound kind but feel wrong. These are the micro-expressions, the fractures in the facade. Psychological research confirms that even brief facial cues and minor tonal shifts can reveal suppressed emotions. When you learn to observe these, not with suspicion, but with calm awareness, you regain the power of discernment. Boundaries, likewise, are not fortresses, but filters. When you challenge a bond by saying no or stating a need, you see who moves nearer and who drifts away. Allegiance that crumbles when you assert your autonomy was never allegiance. It was control masquerading as care. By drawing these lines, you aren't rejecting love. You are inviting only the love that is resilient enough to remain. Yet the most profound healing may come not from observing others, but from looking inward. Betrayal frequently reveals not just their shadow, but yours. Jung discussed integration, the act of facing one's own internal monster rather than projecting it onto others. Writing, therapy, or simple silence can reveal where your own need for acceptance may have obscured your vision, or where a fear of solitude made you grasp what was never real. When you no longer need external approval, the false friend's influence wanes. Their power was never in their mask, but in your need for it. This is the contradiction of healing. It doesn't leave you bitter. It leaves you clear-eyed. You cease to confuse the performance with the person. You cease to misinterpret flattery as affection. You start to prioritize authenticity over approval, even if authenticity feels lonelier, quieter, and slower. In that decision, you find the few friendships that don't fade when things get difficult, that don't waver in the face of your success, and that don't break when reality replaces the illusion. Healing isn't about avoiding all future pain. It's about seeing clearly enough to know which connections are worth the potential wound. When you see with that clarity, what's left is no longer just psychology. It's something more fundamental, more timeless, belonging not just to the science of behavior, but to the wisdom of the soul. The most damaging false friend isn't the one who gossips about you, nor the one who resents your success. The most damaging false friend is the one you harbor inside. The part of you that betrays yourself every time you muffle your own truth, every time you put on a mask to gain acceptance, every time you prioritize the performance over your presence. Consider the innumerable times you've dimmed your own radiance to ensure others felt comfortable. The moments you laughed when you were in pain, agreed when you wished to object, or remained quiet when your spirit needed to shout. These self-betrayals are more profound than others' deceptions, as they are injuries inflicted by your own hand. You excuse them, telling yourself it was pragmatic, it was safer, it was polite. But security built on self-silencing is a cage, and kindness without truth is a toxin. Philosophers have long warned of this internal threat. Nietzsche noted that the most alarming falsehoods are those we tell ourselves, as they define our reality. Seneca observed that public acclaim is temporary, but a person at peace with their own character is immovable, and Jung taught that the mask, while protective, also suffocates, keeping the true self banished until courage brings it back. To be your own genuine friend is challenging. It requires looking in the mirror and acknowledging the shadows you've evaded, the jealousy, the insecurity, the craving for approval. For it means conceding that you sometimes tolerated false friends because their facades matched your own. But when you start to voice your truth, regardless of how weakly, something profound happens. The right people move closer, while those who can't stand the light recede. Authenticity isn't about being flawless. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. When you are no longer afraid to be real, you no longer rely on the false security of pretense. At that point, a change occurs. You cease looking for loyalty in others who are hiding, because you have finally taken off your own mask. You cease to define your value by applause, having learned the quiet strength of self-allegiance. Perhaps this is the ultimate paradox. True friendship doesn't start with others. It starts with you. When you become your own ally, you identify truth in others more readily. When you stop suppressing your voice, you hear more distinctly who is truly listening. Once you cease to be your own betrayer, no facade can fool you. This is because the most uncommon and stable connection is not discovered in someone else's grin. It is the one you build internally when you at last commit to being authentic.